This is TLV1.
The Tel Aviv Review.
Hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review, brought to you by the Israel office of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, the sponsors of a new series on democracy, populism and authoritarian trends around the world. If you like us, please join our community of supporters by giving on to our Patreon campaign. You'll find it on our homepage. That's tlv1.fm/Tel Aviv Review, all in one word. Scroll down to the bottom of the page and you see a big red button that says Patreon. Click on it and support us. Yes, we are counting on you. I'm your host, Gilad Halpern.
And I'm your co-hostess, Dalia Shenlin. Every week we talk about books and research and other things we like. And as Gilad mentioned, this is part of our series, which also deals with Holocaust studies and memory. This week's guest is Professor Mohammed Dajani. He has been the founding director of American Studies at Al-Quds University and the director of libraries there in Jerusalem. He was in the past an adjunct fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. He's currently developing a PhD program at Europe University in Flensburg, Germany, in reconciliation and conflict resolution. And he's also the founder of Wasatia, the movement for moderate Islam. He's earned quite a reputation for taking Palestinians to Auschwitz and generally advocating teaching Holocaust among Palestinians. Professor Dajani, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here.
We're happy you're here too. Let me start with a very basic question. Why is teaching the Holocaust so controversial among Palestinians?
It has to do with the conflict. And without the conflict, it wouldn't have been. But there are within the Palestinian community those who think that this is a Zionist narrative and that to admit it as a Zionist narrative, then it is infringing on the Palestinian collective narrative. And so many believe that there is a strong link between the 1948 Nakba and the Holocaust, and without the Holocaust there wouldn't have been a Nakba, which is not true, but it is part of the lack of education about what is the Holocaust, how did it evolve, what are the roots of it, and things like that. So basically, Palestinians are linked to the Arab world, and in the Arab world, the historic developments were anti-learning about the Holocaust. And within the Arab world, some of the popular books are not Holocaust education, but rather books such as the Protocols of the Elder of Zion or Mein Kampf for Hitler, or other books which are the legacy of the past as a result of the conflict, particularly of the 50s and the 60s, where people objected to learning about Israel, knew nothing about it.
So how do you address this question, this causal link that many are making between, as you said, the Holocaust and the Nakba? What do you tell your interlocutors, your students? I mean, it is a prevalent view among Palestinians.
Definitely. Also, it is in education, because part of the problem is lack of education, and so part of the solution is more education or focused education on that. So I believe that there are areas where you should challenge, and we have to challenge this taboo and to tell the Palestinians there is nothing to fear from learning about the Holocaust. It doesn't affect your national story. On the contrary, it will broaden your views, and it will help you, enrich you. It will be within the Quranic message of when it says in the Quran, and God advance us in knowledge, so it doesn't hurt to know what has happened. And then don't judge before knowledge, and so to seek knowledge first and then just second.
Well, you're touching on a question that I think arises when we talk about the controversial aspect of this. Is the problem that this particular history of the Holocaust can only be seen as a nationalist narrative, and it's impossible to just study it in a historical way? I mean, is this a problem of separating national conflict from epistemology? Is the real problem that there's a lack of some sort of a lack of epistemological commitment to just learning history before we put it in the context of the conflict among Palestinians in general or among the Arab world? Is it a bigger problem?
It is. It is a big problem because we are selective in what we teach. So we choose not to teach things that are about the other. So it's not only about the Holocaust, and we don't teach anything about Judaism. We don't teach anything about Jewish civilization. We don't teach anything about any things related to Jewish culture. Why do you have so many holidays? What are these
Why
holidays?
do we have so many holidays?
It's a question we ask ourselves all the time.
Yeah.
You know what they say, they tried to kill us, we survived, let's eat.
Yeah, okay.
But is that just, who is the we? Is it Palestinians? Is it the Arab
It's,
world? And I would question
it's
if it's
both.
only,
It's
but I would
both.
question, is it only the Arab world? I mean, what, in Western Christian society does not leave out many things?
Even if they leave, don't intentionally do that. Yani, it could be just missed as part of it. Once you bring it to their attention, they do it. Here, once you brought it to their attention, there was an outburst that this should not happen, and this is breaking a taboo, and this is getting away from the flock. And so many were very upset about this, and people tended to react very violently, and I ended up resigning from the university as a result of the Auschwitz trip and trying to rationalize teaching about the Holocaust to Palestinian students. And so this is part of a historic tradition that has been there from the 50s, when the war between, or the gap, the conflict between the Israel and the Palestinian and the Arab world in particular was very wide, and the enmity was at an apex. And so here it is not easy really, even with the peace agreements, which were agreements that were on paper, such as the Jordan agreement, peace agreement, or the Egyptian peace agreement, but it never really filtered down to the people, filtered down to the education, filtered down to the culture. And as a result, we are still very frustrated by the past, and this is affecting how we think about the present.
There really are two motives, perhaps, to learning about the other person's narrative, or what is perhaps perceived about the other side's narrative. And one is empathy, to get to know them better and perhaps feel closer to them and, see cooperation more vigorously. And the other one is know your enemy, how to understand what they think in order to fight them better. When you teach the Holocaust, or perhaps, what is perceived by the Palestinians, the other person's narrative, to which do you subscribe? Both you personally, I think it is the former, because you have been talking about empathy, and we'll get to that in a second. But also, do you think that know your enemy can perhaps be a better rallying cry to get more Palestinians to learn about the Holocaust?
Actually, I was in a conference in Birzeit once, Birzeit University, and it was about the United States, relations between the Palestinians and the United States. And one of the professors was trying to rationalize teaching American studies by claiming or by saying that know your enemy, learn about. So I was very opposed to that notion that we are learning just to learn about an enemy. First, it's not anymore an enemy, it's a partner in peace. This is the Oslo heritage. And we are in pre-Oslo 1993, this could have said, know your enemy, which they did not know anything about the enemy. So, but in post-Oslo, I don't think it's an enemy. You could say, know more about your partner in peace in order to solidify peace, because in this way you will be bridging the gap and between that has been very wide from the past, from the enmity of the past. And as a result, I would tend to say, no, it is not know your enemy, but build bridges with your partner in peace.
Let me ask you about this bridge building. So how effective has it been? When you took group of students. And how many times did you take students to Auschwitz to visit and learn?
It was once that, yeah.
What were the reactions of the students? Did you feel like they were changing the way they think about anything? Did it open their eyes? Can you remember anything that people said?
Yeah. Actually, if you, when I look back at it, and even within, it depends, within the majority, there was an awakening. But also, it is very important whether you visit with an open mind or with a closed mind. If you are visiting with a closed mind, anything you see, you do not care for, and you do not appreciate, and you do not want to learn, you do not want to understand, and try to rationalize as if this is part of a conspiracy. But if you go there with an open mind, which most students did, then whatever you see, it will be an awakening for you. And many of the students there felt that way. And for instance, one of the students who was a young woman, and she was imprisoned in Israeli jails for 9 years. And once she saw the sign, Arbeit macht frei, and she thought any work sets you free. So this is a concentration work camp. So people come here, work, and they might get out of it. But she asked me about it, and I asked her to go and look it up. And she went and found a book in the bookstore there, in the museum. And the book had the title, which said, one of the pages, about the commander of the camp welcoming new arrivals by saying, all those who enter here abandon hope, for the only way out is through the chimneys of the crematorium. So, and then it dawned on her that it's not a concentration work camp. And other students used to compare between when they were walking around between Israeli jails and the Nazi jail. But here, what they missed is the small picture with regard to the big picture. For the Palestinian, he was looking at the small picture of the same jail, or there is the barbed wires or the guard sentries post and things like that. But this is from a Palestinian perspective. But the big picture is, which they did not see, is how putting themselves in the shoes of the other, and how a Jew will see that. Well, because when a Jew looks at the concentration camp of Auschwitz and others, he sees that it was meant for a final solution. It was meant for annihilation of a civilization, of a people, of a religion, and of a culture. And in this way, this is the big picture. And so there is a big gap between the Palestinian looking at the small picture and the Jew looking at the big picture. And so for me as an educator, it was very important how to link both pictures so that the Palestinian can put himself in the shoes of the other. And it helps if I can also convince the Jew or the Israeli to put himself in the shoes of the Palestinian, to look at the Nakba and to look at his own suffering as a result of what has happened.
Well, I want to ask you about this because in 2011 you co-authored an op-ed with Robert Satloff of the Washington Institute in the New York Times, and you wrote that the Jews have the Holocaust and the Palestinians have the Nakba, but you called that a facile equation and rejected this comparison, which I understand. But I do want to ask, as somebody who looks at, let's say, even a bigger picture of national identity, nationalism, in every national story, there is a trauma, a founding historic, cosmic, major, historic trauma. And this gives the people their identity. It's not unique, I think, to Jews, and it's not unique to, it's maybe not every nation, but many nations have it. So even if the historic events are very different, the Holocaust and the Nakba, there's very little to connect them historically in terms of what actually happened. But in terms of what their meaning is for each nation, do you think that there's no way to compare the role that each one plays in the experience of the collective consciousness of Palestinians and their founding trauma is the Nakba, just as for Jews the founding trauma is the Holocaust or ancient attempts at destruction?
I think here it's important that we make a distinction between the individual memory and the collective memory.
Okay.
Because Primo Levi writes in his book about when he was in the concentration camp, looking from a window very far, seeing a bird flying and appreciating that the bird has the freedom to fly when he didn't. So in this comparison, a Palestinian could exactly be in that spot, looking out of a window, seeing a bird flying while he is being imprisoned. Along this comparison, that's as far as the comparison goes.
You mean in a very general sense,
Yeah.
we are not free.
That's as far as the metaphor goes. But beyond that, there is hope and there is no hope. Because for Primo Levi, there was no hope, but eventually he was set free in the sense that there was an end to that suffering. While within the Palestinian memory and Palestinian collective experience, the ongoing suffering is continuing. And this is part of the problem in the sense that the occupation, if you travel within Palestine, you see the occupation. There are so many people in prison, more than 10,000. Their families are suffering. Their kids are suffering. There are people who die. More than 6,000 people in Gaza were maimed because of shooting as a result. I'm not blaming anybody. But what I'm saying is we have to take that on impact on the psyche of the Palestinians.
But there's more than the political or perhaps even the affective dimension to it. You're not just talking about empathy with what you call the Palestinians' partners in peace. There's also a religious element to all this in the concept of Wasatia. That is a religious concept that's taken from the Quran and is the name of the movement that you started and you lead. Can you tell us what Wasatia is and what are the Quranic roots of it?
Wasatia is a culture, is a behavior, it is a way of thinking. And the reason I started the movement is that it was my experience, because basically my background is not religion. My background is political science, international relations, international economy.
We might point out that you have 2 PhDs in these topics. I just have to brag.
Yeah. And so my concern was awakened in religion in the aftermath of the Palestinian national elections of 2006. And where
Hamas won.
Yes, and Hamas won and got the majority within the Palestinian Legislative Council. So I was standing at the balcony of my office overlooking an Israeli checkpoint, which was in Dahat al-Barid. And it was Ramadan, and it was a Friday morning, and people were stacked, hundreds of people were stacked against the checkpoint, trying to go through to Jerusalem to pray at the Haram, because they think that it is very blessed for them to do so. And the Israeli soldiers were pushing them back because they didn't have permits to go through the checkpoint. And they were throwing at them tear gas, and I thought that there will be shooting, there will be people killed. But after a while, I noticed that the tension cooled down, and it seems that a deal was made between the soldiers and the Palestinians, in which the soldiers brought the officer at the checkpoint. They brought buses and led the people through the checkpoint. They took their IDs and searched for no weapon. And then the buses took them to Jerusalem, to the Haram. And after the prayers, the buses brought them back to the checkpoint. They got their IDs and went home. So to me, it was a very awakening vision, because I thought these are religious, but they are not extremists. Other extremists would not have accepted to deal with the Israelis or to work with the Israelis for a deal. And I thought I used to teach game theory. And I thought that this is a win-win situation where the Israeli soldier worried about security and isn't trusted about security. And the Palestinian worried about missing prayers at the mosque. So both of them got what they wanted. I thought that these are moderates. The question was who represents them in my mind. And in Palestine, there are 10 religious parties, Muslim religious parties, and 40 secular parties.
40?
Yeah.
You're worse
40.
than the Israelis.
Yeah.
We only have 41 total who ran in the last election.
And actually, there are more than 40, but I'm saying 40 for as a conservative figure. And but there isn't a party or a group or a movement that would link between religious aspiration, political aspirations, and the religious values. So that's where I thought that to start this movement, I called Wasatia, which is, I didn't create the word, it is from the Quran, and it has been before Prince Hassan of Jordan actually has been writing about it before and was promoting it in Jordan in the 80s and 70s and 80s. So I thought that to create a movement that will be an address for these people who are disenfranchised, who may want to belong to a religious party but cannot find it because the extremists have hijacked the religious name and the religious slogan.
And is there a connection between having founded this movement and deciding to teach Holocaust studies, Holocaust history and memory to Palestinians? Or are these just two totally separate things?
No, they are not separate. I think one links to the other because once you are into the moderation culture, the Wasatia culture, then this impacts the way you think. It makes you more inquisitive to knowledge, at the same time wanting to learn and wanting to advance knowledge. And so this is where the Wasatia concept comes in, because the Wasatia is a Quranic concept. In Arabic, Wasat means middle, linguistically speaking, or center. But religiously speaking, it means tolerance, it means justice, it means balance. So the word is taken from a verse in the Quran, and it is in Al-Baqarah Surah. Al-Baqarah Surah is the second chapter of the Quran, and it is the largest surah. And it is composed of 286 verses, and verse 142 says that guide us to the right path. And then the verse 143 says, and thus we have created you a moderate nation. And so symbolically, it tells you what is the meaning, because there are others who claim that there is no middle ground, there is no wasatiyah in Islam, while this concept, this idea is being portrayed within that verse. And the fact that it is verse 143 and that the surah is 286, so it comes exactly in the middle, tells you the significance.
So it's located in the middle, it is a middle path, and it's related to how you think.
Exactly. How you think, how you behave, it's all about you. And it is a concept that has been long advocated by other philosophers, by Plato, by Socrates, by Aristotle, who wrote about the golden mean, and Maimonides, and other.
Once upon a time, they were friends with the Islamic world.
Yeah,
do you have a dialogue with radical clerics and political Islamists from Hamas and other places, other parties, about that? I mean, they, of course, in their own eyes, they are great experts on the Quran and its teachings. What do you tell them when you say the Quran is very explicit about moderation?
Or what do they tell you?
They claim that there is no middle ground. Either you are right or you are wrong. We are right, they are wrong. But this is not what the Quran says, because what the Quran says is that only God knows the truth. And in which we differ, God will decide among us on Judgment Day. And as a result, when they claim that there is no middle ground, that there is no moderation in Islam, they miss the meaning of Islam, the spirit of Islam. And then they will misinterpret the verses in order to solidify their position and to promote their version of Islam, which is not the Quranic version. Because in the Quran, if we take, for instance, Al-Fatiha, Al-Fatiha is the like Lord's Prayers. It is the first chapter in the Quran, and it's made of 7 verses. The last 3 verses says, "Guide us to the right path, the path of those whom you have blessed, not those with whom you are angry, or those who are blessed." So the Islamic interpretation that I have learned when I was young, and which a Pakistani or an Afghani or any other Muslim from different parts of the world would learn, that the blessed are the pious, God is angry with those who deny him, who do not believe in him, and the lost are the in-between, the hypocrites or people who are not yet sure about their faith. But here we tend to find the Ibn Taymiyyah, this is an Islamic philosopher that the Wahhabis have adopted. They would say that the blessed are the Muslims, and the God is angry with Jews, and the lost are the Christians. And then the problem becomes more is that they put this into the Quran as a footnote to explain the meaning, and then they distribute this as if it is the meaning, missing that Islam came as a message to humanity. It didn't come as in order to contradict Judaism and Christianity or to confront them, but rather it is to humanity. And it came in Arabia and not in Jerusalem. And it came to Arabs in Arabic language. And in the Quran it says God has sent different prophets with different messages, speaking the language of the people. And so at the same time, it mentions that the holy books and shows respect to the holy books, including the Talmud and the Bible and the Injil. And so they miss on what is, they take the text out of context, depending on the ignorance of the people. And for instance, also, one of the things I was confronted with is that they come to my workshops and then they don't want to listen, and then suddenly they say, in the Quran it says religion to God is Islam, or don't die unless you are a Muslim. So Islam should replace all religions.
So these are hardline Muslims, or who? Who are these people who come to your workshops and say this?
It is hardline Muslims, extremist Muslims, but
people from political parties?
And people from political parties, but they miss that when in the Quran, they depend a lot on the ignorance of the people about the Quran. And so when they use that, when they say that, for instance, the Quran does say religion to God is Islam, but the word Islam here does not mean what they wanted it to mean, because Islam in Arabic means 2 things. Islamic faith, the faith, or to submit yourself to God, or to believe in God, to worship God, or surrender yourself to God. But when it says that in the Quran, it doesn't mean Islam, the faith, but it means Islam, submission to God. Why? How do you explain that? Because also in the Quran, it says Abraham was a Muslim. Moses talked to his people, and the people said, we are Muslimun. And Jesus talked to his disciples, and the disciples said, we are Muslimun. And this was a long time before Islam emerged as a faith. So the meaning there is not the faith, but the meaning there when it says religion to God is Islam, the meaning there is to submission of God. So one is exclusive, one is inclusive. They choose the exclusive.
But so I understand. You're saying basically the people who connect with a more moderate version need to learn to think of other interpretations and learn other interpretations than just one that they have been told. And to do that, they need to think more openly.
And they need to have knowledge of the Quran.
And they need to have knowledge. But maybe knowledge in general is what you're saying.
And in general.
Now, here's my question. It seems like your work has been interpreted, okay, as, yes, knowledge in general, think critically, learn history. But I think that many people among Palestinians are saying, you're doing all of this in order to advance dialogue. And you have, we've got lots of your articles here about the importance of dialogue. But they also criticize dialogue because they say we've been in dialogue with the Israelis for 25 years, let's say since the Oslo years, and we're still living under occupation. And the criticism is that dialogue isn't working. What do you say to that criticism?
It depends on what type of dialogue has been done.
Okay.
In the Quran, it says, وَجَادِلْهُمْ بِالَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ. Argue with them softly. And so in the Quran, when it does that, it talks about the other or within oneself. And it is not only a Muslim talking to non-Muslim, but also a Muslim talking to a Muslim. So dialogue is very important. However, I think that when they say that dialogue is not liberating anything or is not ending the occupation or it's not getting us a state, it has nothing to do with the dialogue. It has to do what type of dialogue you have been using.
What kind have they been using that hasn't been?
I think they have been using the dialogue that turns the other off rather than on.
Because they reject the history of the other?
Not only that, because they reject the history, because they reject the culture. And to give you an example, look, when the issue came up about recognizing Israel as a Jewish state, and then everybody was against it from the Palestinian side. If they would have read their history good, they would have found that the UN partition resolution of 1947 decided to divide the country into a Jewish state and an Arab state. So a Jewish state was established at the time, and so to say that Israel is a Jewish state, there is not much that you can say about, because it is a fact, and you cannot deny Israel is a Jewish state. It is the Israelis who do not want it to be called a Jewish state because they don't want the division within the state from the seculars or from the religious. And so it is something to be settled within the Israeli community rather than for us to recognize. And I keep saying that, okay, thank you very much. We are very actually honored and pleased that you want a recognition from us, the Palestinians. Although
it's kind of flattering, huh?
Yeah, it's very flattering. Yeah, because all you have to do is go to the United Nations and decide to call yourself the Jewish state of Israel, and you will have more than 200 countries recognizing that. But no, they want the Palestinians to recognize that, which is, I believe it's a big honor for us.
It sounds like you have a little bit of criticism of both sides, which is probably good.
That's what it means. I mean, the way I hear it is that it's not just about the dialogue tactics of the Palestinians, it's also the dialogue tactics of the Israelis. That in a way, as you insinuated now, it was just one method to continue foot dragging and not reach out to the Palestinians in earnest. Now, the question is, what do you think the Palestinians could do to foster a political process that, how do you see a political process towards independent sovereignty, a state emanating from the dialogue that you're advocating?
Here we have to have a charismatic leader, which we don't have, because you want somebody who would lead the people. So far, whoever we had people being led by the masses rather than leading the masses. And so here, this is a significant part. The second is to end the action-reaction. The Israelis understand our psyche very well, and they understand how to speak to us. So they know that within the 1947 partition resolution, the Jews did not want that resolution because it gave them much less than what they expected. But they did not say that. So they said, yes, we accept it, so that the Palestinians would reject, or the Arabs also would reject it, because it is the psychology that if the Israelis want it, the Jews want it, then it is good for them. So we should reject it.
And you think the Israelis are counting on this?
They are.
And you're saying if we change our approach, this could, kind of throw a twist into the Israelis' plans.
But perhaps a more proactive, way of engaging.
Thinking, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because, look, what is happening with the peace process in the last 10 since Netanyahu came.
Oh, is something happening? I hadn't noticed.
I'll tell you how. What has happened. What has happened is that Netanyahu was, his policy was to not to be engaged in the peace process and to try to undermine the Oslo Accords. But he didn't want to cancel the Oslo Accord, and he claimed for a while that they support the two-state solution. However, everything that has been done is to undermine that. Now, the Palestinian took a stand that we will not sit on the negotiation table unless the Israeli government will stop expanding on the settlements. Now, to the Israelis, to the Israeli government, that was music to their ears. So they continued expanding so that these people will not sit on the table to negotiate. So everybody was in this situation where the Israeli government continued expanding on the settlements, and the Palestinians kept saying, we will not sit on the table until they stop doing so. So basically, why don't you sit on the table and while sitting in part of your negotiation, tell them to stop doing that, rather than saying that I will not sit on the table until they do that. So this is what I'm talking about, understanding the psychology of the other, and working along these
I agree,
things.
and I'll bring it back to the historical element, because I think one of the major complaints of the Israelis, and Netanyahu says this all the time, is that the Palestinians don't acknowledge not only the Jewish state, but the Jewish history and narrative. And they accuse Abu Mazen of Holocaust denial. And you're saying, no, we have no problem acknowledging history. But we do, because it's been controversial, and you have faced criticism and even some vandalism. And I want to ask you, maybe as a final question, which is, subversive proposition. When you try to teach about this, do you look only at the Jewish Holocaust, or do you say, listen, this is not impossible to believe, because we have other examples of attempted genocide, whether it's Rwanda or the Armenians? Do you also try to convey this to students, and maybe it will help them be less defensive about learning the history of the Jewish Holocaust?
This is our strategy. For instance, when we teach about the Holocaust, we don't teach about the Holocaust. We start by teaching about the allegory of the cave by Plato.
Sure.
To talk about knowledge and how we are being captivated in a cave, and that we need to get out of that cave. So we talk about closed-minded people versus open-minded people, about that mind is like a parachute. It will not be useful unless it is open. And
I like that metaphor. It's better than the cave.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so there are... This is how our approach to education, that we don't start immediately with talking about. So to talk also about the Holocaust, we talk about other sufferings of the world, and then we discuss this as part of human endeavor to make this a better world, rather than in order to learn from the past experiences. So yes, it is very important that Palestinians stop thinking of them as if they are the only victims in the world, and there are no other tragedy more tragic than theirs, and to see their suffering and their tragedy within the historic perspective of what has happened to other people also. So it is, in our PhD program, this is an important part of that education. And the reason that we are starting this PhD program is actually to have people become experts in the field, so that they can bring this back home, in the sense that let them learn about South Africa instead of taking the wrong lessons from South Africa to claim Israel is apartheid like South Africa, and so we want to boycott Israel. And in boycotting Israel, we will achieve what we want, exactly what happened in South Africa. No, you cannot do that, because Palestine, Israel is not South Africa. So to learn about South Africa will help a lot in what to do and what not to do. And same thing with Ireland, same thing with Rwanda, because learning about Rwanda it started with incitement. And here, you want to prevent incitement so that you don't end up with the same. So it is important to learn about how other massacres did take place, why did they take place, and how can they be prevented in order so that it cannot be repeated, rather than saying we are victims and we are the only victims. And look at Syria, what's happening in Syria. It was very tragic. Look what's happening in Yemen. The children in Yemen are dying. A whole generation of Yemenis are being wiped out as a result of the famine and the diseases and the war and the conflict there. There are many other tragedies today that's taking place, and that's why we as Palestinians and Israelis, we need to look for the future. And I believe that we have inherited this conflict from our grandparents, and the legacy we should leave to our children is peace rather than continued conflict.
Well, to that we can only say inshallah alavai. Yeah. I like this idea of knowledge and history and critical and open thinking as a way to conflict resolution. What do you think,
Gilad?
I think that's a great tagline.
Yeah. Professor Mohammed Dajani, thank you very much for joining us today.
It's a pleasure.
And many thanks to Gizem Ozdemir, our sound engineer, and to Itai Shalom and Georgia Foscarini, our producers, as well as the Israel office of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation for the generous support of this series on democracy, populism, nationalism, and authoritarian trends, as well as German-Israel relations and the study of the Holocaust. And I would like to ask you a little something. Many or most of you listen to us on the Apple Podcasts app, and we would like to ask you to please consider writing us a review. You can also support us by going to our website, that's tlv1.fm/Tel Aviv Review, and subscribing onto our Patreon campaign. Check out our archive. It has more than 500 interviews to keep you entertained and annoyed. If you like us here, you can also like us on Facebook. Our page is called the Tel Aviv Review Podcast, Ideas from Israel. And don't forget to follow Dalia and me on Twitter. Join us again next week for another edition of the Tel Aviv Review. And until then, from Dalia and from me, goodbye.